Okay, well, I guess we're live now. One of the first things I'd like to do is thank you, Cruz, and thank you, Judy, for being here with me today and doing some beads and chats. I have a pre-existing relationship with Judy. We run into each other at conferences, and she's been very generous. And this has been like a really great opportunity to meet you as well, Cruz, and get to know you better. I know your mom, like
Yeah.
I hang out with your mom a lot. So it's fun meeting people like around my own age who are doing super cool, amazing, inspiring things. So yeah. So first things first, I do have to talk about lovely people who are funding these series. The Heart and Soul Fund by EPCOR was created to support organizations that bring joy to our community and provide a lifeline to those in need. It is designed to help the arts community and charitable organizations build resilience and deliver programming that uplifts Edmontonians. That is so Bead and Chats has been made possible through support from Heart and Soul Fund, the Heart and Soul Fund from EPCOR. So if you want to learn more, go to EPCOR/Heart and Soul Fund to hear more about it and see what else is happening because of that great initiative. And so I will start off and introduce myself. I just kind of started rambling. So for those of you who are in the audience, my name is Franchesca Hebert-Spence. I was previously the Adjunct Curator at the Art Gallery of Alberta. I am one of 4 curators on the Borderline Biennial of Contemporary Art 2020. My colleagues, Sandra Fraser, Lindsay Sharman, and Felicia Gay are the 3 other curators who were on the project and are associated with the Art Gallery of Alberta, the Remai Modern in Saskatchewan, and Felicia's at the Mackenzie right now. So yeah, it's a multi-diverse team of individuals, and it was a really great opportunity to work with some spectacular folks and learn more as an emerging curator. And so the project that we worked on was Borderline, and the Borderline in Edmonton has since closed because of the provincial-wide closures, but the work at the Remai Modern is still up, and that is where Judy and Cruz's work is on display. And so they'll introduce themselves, and then we'll start talking about the work that is presented up above. That is, and while we're beading. So yes, Judy, Cruz, if you'd like to.
Thank you, Franchesca. It's really great to be here doing this thing. I can't do it with both in. Okay, so Tensei Judy Anderson at Segason. As a Nihil guest on this land from the Gordon First Nations, Treaty 4 Territory, Saskatchewan, I'd like to take this opportunity to acknowledge the ancestors of this land. So I'm living in Calgary right now. So the traditional territories of the people of the Treaty 7 region in southern Alberta, which includes the Blackfoot Confederacy, comprising of the Siksika, the Piikani, and the Kainai First Nations, as well as the Tsuut'ina First Nations and the Stoney Nakoda, which includes the Chiniki, Bearspaw, and Wesley First Nations. And the city of Calgary is also home to the Métis Nation of Alberta Region 3.
Hey, my name's Cruz Anderson, and I'm from the George Gordon First Nation, just like my mom.
And you work in?
Kind
of art.
Yeah, art.
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, I can pull up the slide again, and if you guys want to talk a little bit about your work and a little bit of, do we want to start talking about like intergenerational collaborations, or do we want to start talking about the names of your work and how that has come about? And then we can also just start getting into the beading and the making while we're having that discussion.
Sure. How about we start with talking about the titles, maybe the work specifically? Because as I was saying to Cruz, like I wasn't clear, obviously, but tell us what you work in with your art. So this will probably be a nicer lead in to talk about that stuff. Hey, I have a question. So I see that there are 14 people here, but is there any way that we get to see them too, or do they just listen?
I think they just listen. There are individuals that can type into the chat.
Oh, okay.
And so that's how folks can interact. But I don't think their screens can pop up unless they request access.
Okay, thanks.
So it's not like a traditional Zoom.
Added yet either.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah.
Fabulous. Okay.
But you can see people's names if you want to call out to folks.
You can see their names?
Yes, if you go to attendees. I'm not entirely sure if people should know that or not.
Okay, here we go. Okay, cool. Okay. Okay, so we'll discuss the titles first of the piece that's showing in there. So I'll just say that so what we're doing is that the pieces are actually having a conversation, and what we wound up doing is we wound up using Cree to say these statements that we wanted to make. So what I wound up using was Plains Cree, so that's the dialect that I come from, and I wound up writing my phrase in syllabics, and I don't have the title of, like, I don't actually use the word that or the phrase that I have in the syllabics in the title of the work. I think partly because I want people to hopefully do the work to find out what the phrase is, because I'm really, well, we'll talk about this a little bit more, but because we're really talking about this disconnect from our languages and then also understanding each other as human beings. And so they're actually phrases that evoke emotion. So the title for the bear one is I've Seen Him This Way. And how we wound up doing it was and you can jump in whenever you want, Cruz. We wound up doing is that the animals that we chose, so the bear on there is related to Cruz, and then the coyote is related to me. And so we each came up with a phrase. And so my phrase on the coyote, should I just tell them what it says in real life?
Yeah, sure.
Okay. So my phrase actually says, I'm homesick. And so it's about emotions, and then how for me anyways, because Cruz has a lot of other things that he likes to say about the work, but for me, it's about how we don't always speak about our emotions, or we're not really in tune with each other's emotions, or, emotions are just and I'm going to put this in air quotes, like difficult thing for people to manage. And so having that break between understanding what that says and hearing it or feeling it as the person taking it. Mm-hmm. So the beadwork that's on the coyote, it's in the shape of Saskatchewan. So I'm from Saskatchewan and I live in Alberta. And while I love living here and I'm happy that I'm an invited guest, I also am always homesick for Saskatchewan. And periodically, quite often actually, it's just, I'll just have this sense of home, or I'll think of home. And this voice in the back of my head says, I want to go home. Right. Even though I'm here, I still have that real sense of like groundedness to the prairies in Saskatchewan. And so what Cruz wound up doing was he responded to my phrase, I'm homesick, with, and you can talk about your half.
So I guess just to kind of go back on the work, when we were first kind of starting talking about these pieces, it started with language and kind of like the disconnect between our language, and it was actually at a fast back in Saskatchewan, like maybe 4 or 5 years ago. We were just like on a day when people were out, we were just kind of sitting around and looking through some books that were on the porch of the land that we were on. And there was a little pocket book Cree.
It's a Cree.
Oh yeah, it's a little Cree like a pocketbook, like for phrases and stuff.
Mm-hmm.
And so just kind of like flipping through it, and it's something that, like, if it's in French, it's like, like where's the bathroom, like bread, cheese, whatever. But for this Cree pocketbook, it was like these really like extreme phrases throughout most of the book, like I'm depressed, I'm afraid of the dogs, like and like catastrophic emotions to just like normal emotions and stuff. And I thought that was really like a powerful just book to have for our language that's not really reflected in other languages. So we kind of went through and there's in like verb conjugation, like I guess he, I, like and grammar and stuff. And so we used some of the phrases that were in the book, like the very extreme emotional phrases that we felt kind of reflected our situations. And the words are in Cree in our artwork, and but when we kind of I guess showed the text in our artwork, we tried to abstract it the way that kind of the way these words are kind of hard to access in our culture as well. So mine say I'm having a hard time dealing with my emotions, and
No, it says I'm angry.
no.
Oh.
Yeah.
We're learning new things here.
And then my mom says he is having a hard time dealing with his emotions, and then hers say I'm homesick, and mine say she is homesick. So they're kind of speaking to each other. And then yeah, that's kind of how it started with the text. And then we thought that the bears close to me and the coyotes close to my mom, so we thought that these kind of furs would kind of symbolize their role as protectors of each other, and then they're in conversation with one another, kind of dealing with these emotions.
So the other thing I want to add too is that while we say in English that my response to his piece is he is having a hard time dealing with his emotions, that there's no gender in there, so it's more like that person, something like that, right, as opposed to he specifically.
Yeah.
But I does exist, so it says I am.
I and they,
yeah. And then also Cruz chose to work with his in Swampy Cree.
Oh yeah, the book just said pocketbook Cree, and as we were going through it,
all of
yeah. So basically the book so I used the Swampy Cree because that's what was in the book, because I thought that, like, as a Cree person, just picking up a book, like, that's just the Cree you're exposed to, whether it's your Cree or not. So I thought that was just good to include as well.
Yeah, this interesting conversation about access and also engaging with language. Joy Arcan's work is about a lot of that, and so to see the similarities and to see like the rhythms or resonance with that is really lovely. I also like meant to preface this in the introduction. Oh God, I have a stick that has a box taped to it for when we start beading, and it just fell on the floor, so we'll just ignore that. But one of the reasons I wanted to have a conversation with Judy, you, and Cruz is because I've been, I don't know if the word enamored. It's also interesting to discuss like the different words for emotions and like the depths and intensity of emotions, because we spend a lot of time kind of batting around them to take away the intensity, to not be overly emotional. But yeah, I've really, really enjoyed or respected and just been really curious, I don't even know if that's the right word, of your work as collaborators, both as like family who works together, but for example, the work that was in Bead Speak, the exploit rope, and like making this work to feel closer to each other during like what is a really difficult time. And like most people's lives, when you're a teenager and you're interacting with your parents, there is like this tension that exists, and like you're becoming an adult and an independent human, and there's also like this concern and care, but like a growing acceptance that happens. And so to see like this process manifested into an artwork was like a really beautiful moment. And these this growing, not pattern, but for example, like one of the things that I state in my bio is that Wokotowin, or kinship, is like my process of moving through like curatorial spaces or institutional spaces. But what happens when you have like, when you are working with family, because like my process is to like search for like what are my obligations and to learn those things. But like you guys enact that when you work together, and that's really something that I find really beautiful and inspiring. So I was just hoping to talk a little bit about all of that today and talk about, yeah.
Thank you for those words. What I was going to say is that what I have to do is I have to acknowledge the fast. So all of this work, all of the work that I do, and I'm going to say probably most of my practice comes from spirituality, and it's come from that place. So it all started, the work with Cruz all started with the fast. I went to, when we fast, we're told that you don't go out for yourself. And so you have to go out for somebody else. In this particular fast, I wound up going out for my youngest son, Riel. And so because he got sick all the time, right? And so while I was out there fasting, because you're praying and you're thinking and all of that, I was told he was going to be okay. Riel's going to be fine. And it was Cruz that I needed to worry about. And the thing is that, like he was coming into his teenage years, and we thought everything was okay. Because, kids, they don't tell you everything that's going on, right? We can all go back to what we kept from our parents at some point in our lives, right? Some good stories. He tells me some of those now, and I'm just like, no, I don't want to know that.
Right.
Skateboarding.
You keep them to yourself.
Yeah. So things like that, right? But so at that time, so I had to take a closer look at Cruz and see, like what was going on and why he needed to be honored. And then I had to think about in what ways could I honor him than what was already happening. And I thought, well, putting him in my work. And so I started honoring him in my work when he was about 12. And then he was getting into, but that was like in my practice, like I was thinking about me and I putting a little bit of him into it. And I wasn't thinking about him as this whole human being. So then what I started to do is I started to think about, well, how could I honor Cruz more based on who he is at that time? And so that's how Exploit Robe came out, because he was a budding graffiti artist. He wasn't very good at that time. But at the same time, everybody starts out there no matter what they're doing, right? And I thought this was a really important time in his life. And also, if we looked at traditional ways of being for Indigenous people back then, at that time, he would have been in deep training for, becoming a man. But in this society here today, we don't do that. Children are in school and they're told to sit still and whatnot, and we're not really teaching them based on their gifts. We're teaching them the things that they need to know, but not based on their gifts. So, I could see that even if he wasn't that great at graffiti, there was a gift in there, right? Like, so, and there was a place where he, at least as you can speak to this in a second, but where I felt that he found acceptance was in those letters that he was building and in the colors and that he was experimenting with and whatnot. And so I couldn't, say, just because I don't want you to be a graffiti artist doesn't mean that you can't be one, right? And so I had to like really switch and think about like how graffiti is an art. And and hold Cruz up because of that. And so that's how that piece came to be.
Yeah.
But I didn't get it done. So it was his first burner from when you were about 12 or 14, right?
Yeah. It was just a drawing that I did when I was very young.
And then I beaded it, and then it took me probably from start to finish, like definitely took about, like if I smashed all the hours together, probably 6 months full time. But I think it took me about 1.5 years to make.
Oh, wow.
He was about, you were 18 when it went up in that first exhibition, right?
Yeah, 17.
17 when it went up. And so I have pictures of him that I always show of, because that's when it went up, and it was super cool because he was pretty proud. Yeah.
Yeah, that's cool.
Something to be proud of. Yeah.
Okay. And then from there, so then what happened though was that he wound up switching to, I think Lad's in the audience. So he got Mr. Fogarty. I never used to call him Lad. It was always just Mr. Fogarty. So he went to school at Campbell Collegiate in Regina, and he got Mr. Fogarty as an art teacher who was like an amazing man. Yeah, really pushed Cruz's art and really helped his career and whatnot, right? And so that's when we actually started collaborating together, because they went on a trip to New York, and we did a fundraiser, and that was the first time we did.
Yeah. Like a real collaboration. Yeah.
And Cruz did this painting. He started to paint with graffiti in the style of Picasso. And so the reason I'm smiling is because I love the title that he chose for this little painting. You can say it.
Oh, it was, so I was like really into the Picasso and like the Cubism stuff in high school. And they kind of abstracted from life to make those kind of compositions. And so I just did the same thing, but with graffiti letters instead of like figures or still lifes. And the first painting I did, I just called it If Picasso Wrote, because writing is, you call like doing graffiti writing. Yeah.
And then I did a beaded copy of it, smaller, but a copy of it. And then my title was, I was just like totally taking all the coolness from Cruz. And it was, right?
Sorry. Yes.
If Picasso beaded what he wrote.
So like the iterations and these conversations that are happening between you guys as artists, and as artists that like respect one another.
Yeah.
And respect your practices, which is really lovely.
Yeah. And so, I'm going to add this in. Sorry, I've just like jumped in. No, I'm just going to keep talking. And so what I found is like, so we've done a bunch of collaborations, and what we've done for most of our collaborations has been for donations to fundraisers. And what we do is he'll do a graffiti piece, and then I'll bead it. And then it always has some kind of like cheeky title. So because I think Cruz is really, really, really good at that. And so that's what we continue doing, which should bring us back to, which we didn't finish saying, was like for the piece that's showing in the Ramey is the title. So I'd like Cruz to talk about the title for his piece, because I think it's pretty good.
Oh yeah. Do you want to talk about that right now?
Yeah.
So
I just started beading, by the way.
Oh yeah. So for the pieces in the Ramey, my mom went with what were your titles? They were more poetic and kind of longer, the way that she kind of titles her work. But when we were kind of thinking of the pieces and like kind of putting them all together, the kind of objects that were going to hold the text, we were considering like how they would be displayed in a museum or in like an art gallery. And typically Indigenous objects are displayed under glass with very little like information, and they don't usually have titles. They're usually just descriptive words to talk about their history, So we wanted to kind of, and usually like paintings like Michelangelo or whatever are hung with like titles and not under glass. They're shown as artworks. So we wanted to kind of have a conversation with that in the artwork. So I made kind of very European traditional artwork, so like gold leaf paneling with the Cree words. And so we wanted to put those European objects under glass the way that the Indigenous objects are. And then I just used titles. I just went on the Glenbow website and looked at some of the Indigenous stuff, and I just copied their like kind of formatting for titling Indigenous artwork. So it was just a descriptive word like gold leaf panel, and then they usually put the type of Indigenous. So I just put Cree, 21st century, and then listed the materials like gold leaf, like panel, wood, whatever, on fur. And then there's always an item number to go with to go with like the objects, like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, A, B, C, you know. And that's usually actually, I think, where the title of the work is. It's just like a number, like a barcode. So I just made up some item numbers for them, which I would say are the titles of the work, and it'd be 420-A and 420-B.
Yeah. So. It's really interesting. Like working in a couple of different institutions, there are definitely like works. If I had to, well, first of all, like you learn like either when the work was acquired, like you learn how to glean information out of like those accession numbers. Mm-hmm. And so you either, like if you know the donor numbers, if you remember the donor numbers, if you've worked enough in the database, you can also like remember, like know what date it was brought into the collection. You can usually tell if it's a donation or not. And so it's like, it is like a second language.
Yeah.
And this idea of like categorizing works, and like when you have those numbers on the very end, you realize that it was either like a large purchase or a large donation. Mm. And so it has to do with like the provenance. And so this like museological aspect of the work is really quite interesting, because it does speak to a specific way of being that's also just like widely accepted. And kind of calls out the fact that we do need to be doing the work of finding like more appropriate or respectful ways of identifying work that has no provenance. And what is the labor that we have to do when we bring in work where we don't know the community and we don't know the maker? And how do we honor people who have made these works, who have made these really precious, I don't want to even call them objects, that have lived lives and somehow like ended up in these spaces. And how do we access them? Do I need to know the secret code to like be able to glean that information? How do we get access to these institutions to spend time with our works? And so the title of She is Homesick, like that, just like there's like a heart clench. There's a different word for it, but like it's like a little squeeze of when there's so many like lonely objects in vaults. There's so many like lonely pieces. And the nature of institutions is to collect more and to have like an encyclopedic collection. And what would it mean if we created deeper relationships with everything that we had? And so there's like this really beautiful, sorry, I'm like just going off on a rant now.
No, you're saying some really sweet things, because I just want to comment to the one thing about that loneliness within the collections, right? Because that you're really putting spirit to the pieces. And I think that, you know, when Indigenous people make work, there's definitely spirit in there. And so I'm going to use an example. So Catherine Boyer, super good friend of ours, yours and mine, right? So I'll fight for her. No, just kidding.
I like her more. I love her the most.
Oh, but I think did you just say I love her the most?
Yeah.
You totally beat me. I was just going to say, yeah, but I love her. Anyway, she had a piece collected 2 years ago, maybe by the TD Bank, which is a really nice piece. And then I recently had some work collected by the TD Bank. And when I let her know, I said, now our pieces are together so they won't be lonely, so there's that like sense of that, spiritness in the work, because definitely I'm putting that into my work, and I know she does as well. And then the other thing, this is a little more cheekier, but I was going to say, if you look at the succession number for Cruz's piece, you can tell that it's a little less your date, your number.
Which one?
420A and 420B.
Oh, you're right. I did not notice that.
Yeah.
I am a square sometimes.
Well,
I did not even question it.
Well, he said it in such a deadpan way, just let it kind of slide on by. So the other thing that I wanted to mention, though, like based on that work and what Cruz is talking about, what kind of goes off of it, is that we were very deliberate, like everybody when they're making art, on choosing our materials. And so he wound up working with gold, but I'll talk about mine first, and then I'll maybe get him to answer that. Sorry that I'm running that. So I wound up doing mine in copper. So 2 different colors of copper. And so I was thinking about like the idea of this precious metal, and which metal is precious to who, and in what ways people wind up working, right? So for Indigenous people, copper is like, right? Yeah. So we love copper. So, but then Cruz's response was in gold.
Yeah. To kind of go with the like Eurocentricity of the work I was creating.
To talk about like that making, that legacy of like making and
Yeah. Then also you said something about like when you were working in gold before. Remember when we had that show on Salt Spring?
Oh yeah.
And you had talked about how putting it in gold and putting it into collection elevates, or talking about elevating. Oh, I guess that's graffiti more.
Yeah, that was a different piece.
Okay, never mind. It was super cool though.
I was going to say, it does make sense if you've been working within a graffiti practice. And I think this also speaks to like beadwork and customary practices in general, where like there is a conversation about like, is this an art object? Like the fact that there are entire bodies, entire exhibitions by artists that we would never at any point would think that like an institution would question, but there's definitely stories of people, like of curators having to justify like solo exhibitions of Indigenous folks' work because it wasn't recognized as artwork. And I'm really fortunate to be in a position where, because of my qualifications, because of like my experience, I haven't had similar experiences, but like there's stories that that have been shared with me. And so I don't think it's like entirely a something that no longer exists. And so to this discussion about like what is art, what is considered art, what is art making, and to do sly little things like having it like coated in gold, like that's a kind of like a cheeky way to be like, if you didn't think it's valuable, there's some gold on it, there you go, now it's shiny, you'll like it. If I could, I would like curate an exhibition on beaded earrings, mostly because I have a giant collection of beaded earrings by like so many beautiful, amazing artists. And there's so many artists who have work in galleries that are also selling like commercial beaded earrings in the same gallery shops. And like one of those things is considered art and then the other isn't.
Right.
And so this conversation about production and about accessibility, I've started my PhD. We had an entire thing on Marxism and capitalism. I haven't gotten it out of my head. It's like invasive. This is how people become Marxists. But yeah, like how does our taste dictate like what we deem cultural production with like a capital A art? And how do we as artists speak back to that? How do we as cultural producers speak back to that? And especially like using copper, like having the cultural nuance behind that, and understanding that like it's a really powerful material. Mm-hmm. We are constantly speaking in code, and we're constantly speaking to one another. And so when you have that like resonance with another artist or with another, with a director or like a writer, I think like it's just very important to continue like fostering and facilitating those things. And that it's like myself, I get very stressed out when I'm writing about things, get really like nervous on video, as you can tell. But when we have conversations, it provides people more access to understanding like why it's important, or like that affirmation of like, this is something that like you and Cruz talk about too. Like that's really lovely to know that I'm not just some weirdo in a corner that's thinking about these things. And yeah, I just wanted to.
I feel like so many people. Yeah. So I think like so many people are thinking about things like that. So like when you mentioned that, you know, how the earrings are being sold in the shop and then how the work is being shown in the gallery, I think like Catherine Blackburn is an excellent example of that, right? So she's in Alberta, as you know, and then do they have her earrings or her beautiful work at the AJA in the shop?
I don't think they have Catherine Blackburn's. Last time I was there, it's not in the shop, but the earrings that I'm wearing are made by one of the tour guides. I am forgetting her name right now. Oof. But she's brilliant and really talented and does like beaded hats as well. And it's just very interesting to see that delineation. But Catherine Blackburn was also selling her work at the National Gallery at the same time that she was in Abadaquene. And so to see like those conversations, I definitely bought a pair of earrings from the shop while I was there. But yeah, this idea of like adornment, and also just being able to carry your community with you. You're wearing like a Bethany Yellowtail shirt, like
blazer,
yes. And like the decisions that we make when we go into these spaces, and how like we arm ourselves and protect ourselves, and they're all very intentional. Yes. Also, that elk tooth necklace. I didn't notice it before.
No, it's actually kite.
Oh.
Yeah. They're getting along.
That's good.
Well, I was going to say that Catherine Blackburn is her work is selling in the Remai gallery. Yeah, I was going to say just turn that off. Just turn it off. Okay. Is showing in the gallery, and I see that. I'm just going to answer. There's in the question. In the chat, there's a question. It's from Belinda, and she said, "Can you talk about your thoughts and around integrating animal hide / fur into your work? Are there protocols around the use concerns?" Do you want to answer that first?
Are there protocols integrating? Well, we get all our furs from L'Orange, where my dad's from the Robertson Trading Company. They kind of buy furs from the indigenous folk who are out hunting and trapping. So I think it's a pretty ethical way of getting the furs. We're not just buying them from a big company. And I think indigenous people usually have the go-ahead to put fur in their work, no matter what, because it's been traditional to us for so long and a part of our culture.
So I have a teacher, and I always asked her. I'd always go to her with my ideas for my work just to make sure that I wasn't breaking any protocol. And I don't know what art piece I was on, and so I went to her and I said, okay, Maria, this is what I want to do. Can I do it? And then she said, yes, you can do that. And then she looked at me really hard in the eyes and she said, Judy, I give you blanket permission to work in the way that you want to, because I know that you will follow. We will do things in a good way and that your heart is in the right place. And so even though every time I still come up with an idea, I'm just like, okay, I'm sending this to Maria on the waves. And if anything happens, if I get a message back from her on the waves, then I won't do it. So that, yeah, definitely really, I think that it would be better if we could go straight to the source for the furs and the hides that we use. But what we've decided to do is to go in the best way that we can, right? And so while Robertson's is the middleman, we know that Indigenous people are supplying the work or supplying the furs and whatnot. So that's what we're doing. So we're like being down south, it's more difficult to wind up contacting the people that do that. Yeah. Hopefully, did we kind of answer your question, Belinda? Oh, okay. So she's asking about the symbolism. Well, we got into ethics.
It's a place to start.
So it was really funny. I actually started working with fur in my work on the in the honoring work that I did. So like if anybody's familiar with the Maria Campbell half-breed box I did, then I did Riel's helmet, so my youngest son's helmet, and then a few other people. So Linda Duval, Sheila Norris, my best friend. I always have to say that, my BFF, Brenda McDougall, and then there's one piece that I'm missing. At any rate, in those works, that's when I really started to use fur. And it was kind of like not a non-intentional thing. It happened by accident. I was working on, actually I wound up buying an otter and I kind of didn't know why I bought it. And so I was at Robertson's and I found this otter and I loved it and I thought it was beautiful and I bought it and I just brought it home and as you all might know, fur is very expensive. And so I kind of felt like, oh, what did you do? Why'd you buy this? But then it worked itself into the work. It worked itself into that piece with Riel. And it wasn't that I was forcing it. It was just kind of like it moved its way slowly into the work. Like it was sitting here and then all of a sudden it got a little closer and a little closer. And then it wrapped itself around that piece. And I was like, yeah, because at that time he was doing a lot of swimming and he just reminded me of an otter. And like, because he swims better underwater than he does above water. So he'll float on his back and would chat with me and whatnot, but then spent most of his time under. And so I felt that there was this like real correlation to him and that otter. And then it started working itself out in that manner. So I don't know, I was someplace and I picked up this fur and I said, this is Sheila, and then so it just kind of kept moving itself into that way. So when I work with it, it's kind of how I feel about that person. Not that not in the same way like with Riel, where I said like Riel is in the water and reminded me of an otter and whatnot, but in the way that just like for some reason that animal really seemed to match that person, not in how they looked or anything, but yeah, in that way. So when we're working with this work specifically, and because we were talking so personally about our feelings and sharing those feelings, we wanted to show ourselves. And so so people do know the half-breed book that I made for Maria. The title is "And From Her Parts of Me Emerged." And so in that is like, it looks like a book and then out of it comes the coyote. And so from, not just from her book, but from who she is as a human being, I wound up discovering stuff about myself. And so that coyote represented me. And then so in this work, in the same way.
Mm-hmm.
You want to?
No, that's good.
Okay. Yeah, and he's a bear. But spiritually. Yeah. Spiritually a bear.
Not very hairy.
Yeah.
Yeah, it also like is an interesting question because especially in the first way that we had like understood that question was how do we have access to that fur and to that being. I don't know. I feel like the questions around like materials and materiality aren't posed in the same way to like non-Indigenous makers. Like the reason why we use fur, or the reason why we use like this particular fox, and why do you use beads when you could paint beads? You could be Christy Belcourt and like make giant paintings of like what you want to bead. I think there's a lot more questions and a lot more like presumed, like there's either like a presumption that there's a story, or that there has to be a reason for it to make it valid. And so I think, I don't know if this was like a conversation I had with you guys last week or if it was somebody else, but like, at what point can we make things because we want to make them? At what point can we make a work for Judy, thinking about Judy, and to make these decisions based on our feelings towards Judy, and to like make intuitive decisions? When can we paint a flower and it can just be a flower? Not medicine. Yeah, I think those are also things that I think about, especially when we have questions being posed within especially these forums too, which is why I proposed a Bead and Chat, so it can be a little bit less formal.
I have my beading in front of me. I just have not done anything.
I know. Like, just a bad curator in the corner, like trying to pick out beads. Yeah. Oh, yes. So, like, what time did the lad just asked a question in the chat, asking, does the concept for this piece predate the pandemic? Yeah, actually. So when we did the studio visits and the conversations, that was the summer of 2019. And actually, I meant to say, Judy has a picture of Cruz's paintings, Cubist graffiti paintings, hung in their home. And so I was able to see, when we did the studio visit with Judy, Cruz wasn't there and I didn't have like the opportunity to meet him, but I was able to see his work. And so I think like that was another like, and it was like a mother's pride of like, also, here is Cruz's painting. And it's like hung over an entryway. Like it's this massive, to put, if you're thinking about like things that you're going to put into your house and like what you're going to like give weight to, you have all of Judy's beautiful like work. The Maria Campbell piece was there. And then Cruz's was like over the foyer into the living room, like in such a prominent like space. You could just, the love was palpable and like the respect was palpable. And so Judy is also one of the artists who has like two different bodies of work included in the exhibition. And so we really couldn't decide and absolutely needed the work where Cruz and Judy work together to be in the show. And so there's two different bodies of work that are being displayed. So sorry, if you want to talk about like how do you think the work has changed in context of the pandemic, and how did like the production of the work change since I guess you guys are together now, but was there a time that you weren't together in the pandemic and you had to collaborate on this work?
Well, we did the great thing is that Cruz and I do a lot of it traveling together. So whenever there's anything, whenever I go anywhere, I want him to come with me. So I try to find the space for him to join me on any of the residencies that I've been on and whatnot. And then we wound up having an exhibition together on Salt Spring, attached to the Salt Spring National Art Prize. And so we went there last fall. So we were still like, I want to say this, is that the idea for this particular piece that's in at the Remai, it was Cruz's idea. He said, "Mom, this is what we should do." Yeah, exactly. That needs to be said, right? And then his idea has always been like, "I know what I'm doing," right? And was always like, "What are we doing again? What are we doing again?" Right? What's your phrase? What's my phrase? No. So we actually wound up having a lot of discussions. So we're very clear on what we were doing. And then, so we had the idea down before the pandemic started, but then he had booked a flight to come visit before the pandemic started, and he still came. So, he wore the mask and everything on the plane and whatnot. And I have to say that my work takes a lot longer to do than his work. His work takes a lot of work, but mine takes more. So we, last year he came because I also bring him in to talk with my students in painting, because he's actually so far an atelier trained painter, and he's done a lot of research in European methods of painting. So he knows how to grind paint and cook up old European stuff. Anyways, and this is stuff we learned when I was attending the Princess School of Traditional Art, and he was taking classes with them on the outside. So anyways, I know how to make a portion of the things that he does. And so we wound up making the panels he needed for for the gold leafing. It's traditionally gessoed panels. Anyway, so that was all done and all made. And so when he came, he sat down at the table and he spent a couple of days working on the gold leaf, and I was sitting at my thing beading. And beading, and then he got up and he left, and I was still beading 2 months later, and his piece was done, and I was like crying. He's done. I'm still, but he's there's still a lot of work that goes into it. It's just a different, yeah. You
have to plan it out, but once you kind of get it done, like the text took a long time. My friend helped me out with kind of abstracting the text. And so we had to do that in Photoshop, and then print it out, make transfer images, and then gesso cut down the birch panels, prime them with like rabbit skin glue, let them dry, gesso them. That takes another day, and then bowl them takes another 2 days, and then put your transfer image on. But then when you're actually gold leafing, it takes like 2 days. But like the process of like planning everything out takes a long time too. But not as long as beading.
But maybe it's almost equivalent, but the beading was just seemed to like never end. So if on the piece, the I'm homesick one, I wound up switching to size 15 beads, and so they're really super tiny. Yeah, because to get the and so it's for the braided portion of it. Yeah. And so to get in the design, I had to go to a smaller bead. So then that as soon as you do that, you double your time. So, I mean, I could have done it with big beads, but then it wouldn't have had that.
It looks better with the small beads.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. It looks so much better. Yeah.
Making that decision for your mom. It looks better like this. You should do this, and like walk away and go get some supper.
And you just sit there and bead for the rest of your life. Yeah.
The rest of your life. Yeah.
But I actually do. I always talk to him about my ideas. Always. I'm like, okay, this is what I'm doing. And so just, compositionally, because sometimes I'll come up with 3 compositions. I'll think this one's good. I just want to make sure. So they're always, and even Riel and Larry, and so Larry's my husband. Always, I'm just like, hey, which one do you think looks better to you? And then they'll point at something and, walk away. So I think my family's always involved with my process for sure.
Yeah, that makes sense. This conversation around like time is really interesting. Time and like intention. So one thing I've like said about beading in the past is that it's like a labor of love. And so like when you make something, and I've definitely used the exploit robe as like as an example of this. So if beading is like a labor of love, and it, especially if you're working with 15s, it definitely is. How like you talk about your work being, or your mom has talked about your work being cheeky. Where would you consider gold leafing or graffiti like this work about intention because of like the planning that goes into it, because of like, I guess, how would you define your work, Cruz? Like through the material or through the process? Like, is it labor of love? Is it like a labor of time?
I think it depends on the artwork. Like when I'm doing paintings, they take a long time. So, and the process is fun, drawings and paintings and stuff. But sometimes like it's just like you have an idea and you want to make the artwork, but like you hate the process. So you just make it to make it and then move on with your life. That's how some of them have went.
Yeah, I guess that makes sense. This idea of like working through ideas, and I think sometimes there can be like preciousness with how we work. Or like even just not wanting to make things based by to make things not like the pressure to do everything perfectly the first time, but to move through an idea, to look at the idea, say whether or not it's good or whether or not the material worked for it, and then to move on and to do something else or to make those edits is really, I think like that's a real gift to be able to do. Not feeling that pressure and not putting that pressure on yourself is it takes a lot of time to get to that place. So
yeah, I think that's like lots of people. I think that's common for most artists, but I think some of the like sometimes the most interesting work that you see are like little sketches, like not like drawing sketches, but you can tell they're like the beginning of an idea that someone just like went through, touched on a little bit, but the immediacy and everything is really sometimes the most interesting, I think.
Yeah, especially like with the graffiti practice and the critiques around the museum. But I realize it's 2:59 and I could probably like keep you guys from here for like another hour if I had my way.
I just want to say one thing real quick, because we just touched on this, and I'll take less than a minute. But my mom is actually listening. Her name is Eileen Anderson, and she said at the very beginning in the chat, "Hi, Mom," or "Hi, this is your mom." Like we forgot her name. I'm just kidding, Eileen. Anyways, I just wanted to say that, so I didn't learn beading. I just want to acknowledge that Sheila Orr was my teacher in beading, and she introduced me to quilling, and then the person who taught me to quill was Jacob Pratt. But I just wanted to acknowledge that last year at Christmas, I taught my mom a little bit of beading. We have to still pick it up, so we only did the one thing, but just like how that intergenerational way of handing down those ways of making for Indigenous people, the line got broken, and so sometimes it's sideways, and then it kind of goes this way, and then it goes back up. You know, it moves itself around in ways. And then I also wanted to say hi, Mom.
Well, do you have any last words that you want to say? Because hi, Mom seems like a really good place to end.
Hi, Mom.
Well, thank you so much for all of your time today, you guys. And thank you. It's been a pleasure getting to know you better, Cruz. It's so nice to see you again, Judy.
You too.
Yeah, well, thank you, everybody, for coming to the talk. And Leah has graciously posted Judy's website. I don't know, do you also have a website, Cruz, that you would like to plug in?
No, I really just Instagram.
Yeah, that's also just where it's mostly pictures of my cat, though. But yeah, well, thank you very much, everybody, for your time and taking the time to come this afternoon. There is lots of really great stuff. If you haven't checked out Borderline at the Remai Modern, there's also a Borderline catalog that has images of all of the work that's in the show. So be sure to check it out. And thanks so much for your time. I've said that like 5 times now, so I'm going to end the presentation.
I'm going to say thank you everybody for coming, and like hi everybody that didn't point out your names, Noreen, Leah. Oh, who else? Alex is there too. So all of you, thank you so much for coming.
Yeah, thanks for coming.